The overhead fluorescents in the hospital janitor's corridor buzzed with a high-pitched whine that drilled into Olivia Monroe's skull like a migraine waiting to happen. She had been scrubbing floors and emptying biohazard bins for nearly 14 hours straight. Her back ached, her shoes were soaked with disinfectant, and her hoodie clung to her skin with the damp weight of exhaustion. No one noticed her. Not the nurses hurrying past, not the doctors barking orders, not the families who cried in the waiting rooms. Olivia had become a shadow in scrubs, and that was fine. Being invisible meant being untouched. Being untouched meant being safe, and safety was all she had left in the world. She was tossing a pair of latex gloves into the trash when her phone buzzed inside, the pocket of her oversized jacket. She pulled it out with hands that shook more than she'd like to admit they always shook now, and saw Caleb's name flash across the screen. Her son, her reason for breathing, her 5-year-old boy with his mop of unruly curls and a laugh that could slice through even the darkest shift. There was a photo attached. He was grinning at the camera, sitting on the porch steps, bundled up in that red hoodie she'd bought from Goodwill. His cheeks were rosy, his front tooth missing, and there was jelly on his chin. Olivia smiled without meaning to, her eyes burning from more than just cleaning chemicals. She wanted to forward the picture to Melanie, her old roommate from vocational school, the only person outside her crumbling family who still checked in. Melanie had been pestering her for recent pictures, promised she'd send Caleb a Christmas card. Olivia tapped the contact and hit send before her exhausted brain could fully catch up. The message whooshed off into the void. Then she looked at the name. It wasn't Melanie. It wasn't anyone she recognized. Her stomach turned to stone. She whispered, "No, no, no," under her breath and typed quickly. "Wrong number. So sorry. Please delete that photo." 3 dots appeared instantly. Someone was already replying. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The message came through. 5 words. Simple, cold, and more terrifying than anything she'd heard in years. "Where did you take this?" In the moment when Olivia's heart felt as though it were being squeezed tight between strange messages and the invisible fear threading its way around her, if you are following this story and sensing each tense beat slipping across the screen, take a quiet second to subscribe to the channel, to like and share, so we can continue bringing you more breath-stealing stories each day. Tell us where you are listening from, which city holds you tonight, whether you are following this journey in the late hours or in a quiet corner of your own. Leave a comment below, because every message you send is a small sign that this story has reached someplace far away, and a gentle reminder that even in the dark, someone out there is still listening. Olivia drew back, her fingers trembling as they tightened around her phone, the glowing screen in her hand becoming a strange, piercing light that seemed to illuminate her entire life with a single question. "Where did you take this picture?" She pulled in a breath, sharp and deep as a blade scraping her throat, then immediately opened the message, held down on it, and selected delete. Her heart pounded so fast that it drowned out every other sound, as though the world had folded in on itself. Her thumb slipped across the screen, chose block number. Everything about this felt wrong, and her instincts whispered that this was not just a stray message. Yet only a few seconds later, while she was still trying to convince herself it was nothing more than coincidence, another text arrived from a different number. She froze. The message contained only a single line. That photo was taken in front of the yellow house, the one with the white fence and the wooden chair painted blue, wasn't it? Olivia did not respond. Her hands had turned to ice, but the phone burned against her skin as if it were branding her. How could this person know the exact place where the picture had been taken? It was the front porch of the old rental house she and her aunt shared in Springdale on the west side of the city. Stumbling toward the staff break room, she shut the door behind her and locked it. Cold sweat slid down her spine as she opened her map app. She typed in her home address, scanning every satellite image, every angle, each narrow corner, but none of the photos were clear enough for someone to describe the porch so precisely, unless they had seen it with their own eyes. She was being watched. She sank into a chair, one hand covering her mouth. Another message arrived. "You usually leave the hospital at 2:43 in the morning. Your kitchen light turns on every night at 9. You walk past the convenience store to the south 3 times a week. Yesterday you bought chocolate milk and instant noodles." Olivia could not breathe. Her pulse slammed against her throat. This was no longer unease. This was a verdict. Every action she performed had been observed, recorded, and analyzed. She looked around the break room. No cameras. No people. Yet she felt eyes on her, watching through the walls. The phone vibrated again. "Caleb looks adorable in the red shirt. His smile is so bright." Olivia shot to her feet, slamming the phone onto the table, wanting to hurl it against the wall but too terrified to let it leave her hands. She pressed her palms to her temples, fighting to steady herself. Her thoughts tore through her mind in frantic spirals. The police? No. She could not trust them. The last time she sought help, they left her alone in a shabby clinic with 2 bruises and a useless report. This time would be no different. But who would do this? Who was the person receiving the mistaken photo? Someone connected to Matthew? Or Matthew himself? No, Matthew was dead. At least that was what Dominic Reyes, the only brother Matthew had ever mentioned, believed. She had never met Dominic, but she had heard that name whispered in secret phone calls years ago, a name that made Matthew go silent, made his voice drop to a hush. Dominic was not an ordinary man. Olivia picked up her phone again. The final unread message glowed on the screen. Do you want your child to be safe? The question was blunt and cold, yet it was the only question that forced her to face the truth. This was no longer about her. This was about Caleb, and she knew, with sudden and devastating clarity, that everything had already slipped beyond her control. When the clock struck 2:43 in the morning, as it always did, Olivia left the break room, pulling her coat tight around her and lowering her hood until it hid most of her face. She crossed the long hallway leading to the rear parking lot, her footsteps quick but never frantic, as though returning to her weathered rental apartment were the one part of the day that no longer frightened her. The sky remained black as ink, and the pale hospital lamps cast long, distorted shadows across the concrete. The air held the metallic bite of cold and the damp scent of melting snow. Olivia clutched her bag strap, scanning the nearly empty parking lot. Only 3 cars were scattered across the far side, and a glossy black SUV sat crookedly in a spot not designated for staff and lacking any hospital sticker. She did not remember ever seeing it before. When she took 3 more steps, the SUV's interior light flicked on. She stiffened. A door opened. A man stepped out. The light illuminated half his face, revealing sharp lines and unblinking eyes. He wore a charcoal gray coat and polished black shoes untouched by snow, his composure steady, each movement measured. Olivia held her breath, her heart beating wildly. She considered turning and running, but a voice cut through the cold, deep and unmistakably clear. Olivia Monroe. She froze. No one addressed her that way. Not coworkers, not neighbors, and certainly not a stranger in an empty parking lot in the dead of night. He took another step, closing the distance but maintaining a careful span between them. I do not want to frighten you, he said, his voice carrying a faint Latin American lilt, soft yet certain. But we need to talk. Olivia stepped back, her hand sliding into her pocket, curling around the small canister of pepper spray she always carried. I do not know who you are. No, the man murmured with a slight smile that never reached his eyes. But I know you, and your son, Caleb. The name struck her like a blow. Olivia staggered, her back hitting a nearby car. He lifted his phone and turned the screen toward her. A picture appeared. It was Caleb in his red hoodie, cheeks flushed, smiling brightly, the very photo she had sent to the wrong number. Who are you? She whispered, her breath breaking apart. He watched her for a long moment, as if weighing how much truth she could withstand in one night. My name is Dominic Reyes, he said, and I believe your son is not simply a random child in a mistaken message. Olivia shook her head, eyes wide. Dominic stepped closer, his voice lower, heavier. I once had a brother, Matthew. 6 years ago, he disappeared after betraying me and my organization. I assumed he was dead, but the boy in the picture... He paused, his gaze locking onto hers. He has the same eyes Matthew had when he was young. Olivia wanted to deny it, wanted to scream, wanted to run, but all she could do was gasp as the ground shifted beneath her. Dominic stepped back as though giving her enough space not to collapse. I am not here to harm you. If I intended to, I would have already done it. But I need the truth, and if I catch you lying, everything changes. Olivia tightened her grip on the pepper spray, knowing it was useless against a man like him. Not because he was large, but because he carried a danger that lived beneath the surface. A cold, methodical control. Dominic turned, walked back to the SUV, opened the door, then paused. Without looking at her, he said, "We will meet again, very soon." He slipped into the driver's seat, the door closing with soft precision, and the SUV rolled out of the parking lot, leaving Olivia standing alone with her heart pounding, her hands chilled to the bone, and the bone-deep certainty that her life had just veered onto a path with no way back. Olivia could barely remember how she made it home. Her shoes were soaked through, Her shoulders ached from the rigid tension she had held for the entire drive, and her eyes had not once drifted from the rearview mirror as she navigated the empty streets. She parked a short distance from the house, staying away from the street lamp, cutting the engine in absolute silence. Before stepping outside, she looked around again. No black SUV, no man waiting in the shadows. Yet the fear clung to her skin like the winter cold. Caleb was asleep when she came in. He was curled beneath his blanket, lips moving faintly with the soft sounds of a sweet dream. Olivia sat at the edge of his bed, her trembling hand brushing his hair as she tried to banish the image of Dominic Reyes standing beneath the parking lot lights like a specter pulled from her subconscious. She could not forget his eyes. They held neither madness nor outright hostility. They were the eyes of a man accustomed to holding all things in his grasp, a man who needed only the lightest touch for every truth to strip itself bare. Dominic Reyes. His name felt like a sentence. She knew nothing about him except the way Matthew had whispered it during late-night calls when he thought she was asleep. Dominic was the one who must never know about Caleb, the one Matthew insisted would never let it go if he found out. Now he knew, and he seemed to know even more than she feared. The next morning, as Olivia forced herself out the door for work, her phone received an email from an unfamiliar address. No subject, no greeting, only a single attachment. A scanned medical file, Caleb's birth record. She opened it with a shaking hand. Every detail was correct. His full name, his date of birth, the name of the hospital, her own name, her identification number. The section labeled father was blank, yet someone had drawn a red outline around that empty space as though delivering a cruel reminder. Olivia clutched the phone as tears welled and spilled. No one but she in the hospital had access to this file. How had he gotten it? Then the phone vibrated again. One message. You should eat breakfast. You have a long shift today. I will not act unless you force my hand. Olivia stared at the screen. Not a threat, yet unmistakably a warning. Dominic knew where she was, what she was doing, and details she had never spoken aloud to anyone. She stepped back from the counter, bumping into the wall as though the world had narrowed by half. She was being watched, not by cameras or simple software, but by something far more intricate than anything she could imagine. Dominic Reyes was no ordinary man. She opened her browser and typed his name. Nothing came up. No records, no photographs, only a scattering of vague old articles describing a Latin American businessman who had built wealth in international logistics. But something in his eyes made her certain Dominic had not earned his fortune through shipping. He was connected to the network Matthew had once fled, the world she had tried so hard to escape. She remembered the last words Dominic had spoken before leaving the night before. We will meet again. It had not been a promise. It had been an unavoidable truth. And Olivia knew the next encounter would not be a simple conversation. She left her night shift with her legs nearly buckling, her mind spinning with exhaustion and dread. She moved quickly through the back hallway of the hospital, refusing to let her gaze drift toward the parking lot where 3 days earlier her entire life had changed. Still, her heart hammered painfully when her eyes brushed over a black SUV parked nearby. Same place, same shape. She lowered her head and hurried. A familiar voice echoed behind her, stopping her breath. Olivia. The low tone was not loud, yet it silenced every thought. She turned, ready to refuse, ready to run, but Dominic Reyes was already there, not waiting for her agreement. A car door opened behind him, as though someone inside had been expecting her. Dominic stepped closer without touching her, but his gaze issued a quiet command. Cold, allowing no choice. Olivia entered the car in a daze, the scent of new leather and faint tobacco filling the tight enclosed space. Dominic followed. The door clicked shut, and the soft sound of the automatic lock felt to her like the snap of chains. The car moved immediately. No one spoke for several minutes, only the steady hum of the engine and the muted blur of streetlights sliding across the windows. Dominic did not look at her. He kept his eyes forward, one hand resting on his knee, the other turning a silver ring on his middle finger in a slow, deliberate motion that unnerved her. At last he spoke. "Do you know what makes me stop everything I am doing?" he asked. One picture, one face, one smile that vanished from this world many years ago. Olivia gripped her bag strap, pressing herself so close to the door that her shoulder nearly touched the glass. Dominic finally turned to her and studied her face with a gaze that lingered longer than any before. "That boy, Caleb, he resembles Matthew more than anyone I have ever seen. Not only the eyes, the expressions, the way he tilts his head when he smiles, the crooked tooth on the left. It is almost like fate is mocking me." Olivia opened her mouth, but her throat was dry. "I do not know who Matthew is," she whispered, barely more than a breath. Dominic narrowed his eyes. Not sharply, but enough to make the air inside the car thicken. No one forgets the person who once betrayed them. No one forgets the face that once called them brother before disappearing with secrets, money, and honor. Olivia said nothing. Dominic leaned back, lifting his chest in a slow breath. He was neither shouting nor angry, yet each word felt like a weight pressing against her ribs. She could keep lying, he said, but doing so would force him to find the truth his own way, and she would not like that way. For the first time, Olivia looked at him, not with fear, but with a rising sense of helplessness. Caleb was not Matthew's child, she reminded herself, but she also knew that nothing she said now would improve anything. Dominic took out his phone. He scrolled, then held it toward her. A faded photograph appeared, 2 teenagers laughing on a basketball court. One was Dominic, younger, his stare already cool. The other had a bright smile, loose curls, and eyes exactly like Caleb's. "Matthew," he said. "My brother." Olivia stared at the screen, then handed it back. She did not know why Caleb resembled that boy, but she had no knowledge of Matthew. Dominic nodded slowly without speaking further. The car turned onto a quieter street, and Olivia suddenly realized they were not heading toward her apartment. She faced him, her voice trembling. "Where are you taking me?" Dominic did not answer right away. At last, he spoke a single sentence, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "Somewhere I can ask you a few things without being disturbed." The car stopped along the edge of a quiet suburban street, far from the hospital and even farther from the neighborhood where Olivia lived. A place without streetlights, where only the dim glow of a shop that had closed early cast a weak pool of gold and the wind sifted through rows of bare trees. Dominic opened his door and turned toward her, his voice low but no longer edged with ice, telling her she could step out. Olivia stared at him, unsure whether to trust the invitation, bracing for the possibility that he might pull her back, question her again, or do something worse. Yet he simply sat there without moving to restrain her. She clutched her bag strap, stepped out into the cold air that slapped her cheeks, and as she closed the door, Dominic lowered the window, his eyes meeting hers one last time in the darkness as he spoke in English, not as a threat but as a certainty. "We are not finished." Then the window rose, the SUV pulled away with a slow, steady motion, and Olivia remained alone on a strange street, her heart thundering, her limbs numb. It took her nearly 20 minutes to flag down an old taxi, whose drowsy driver asked no questions. And throughout the ride she could not stop thinking about Dominic's face, the way he had said Caleb's name, the strange obsession in his eyes when he mentioned his missing brother. She did not understand his true purpose, but she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Dominic Reyes was not a man who spoke idly, and if he said things were not over, then he would return. She slipped into her home close to 3 a.m, crawled into bed beside the sleeping Caleb, and wrapped her arms around him as if she could shield him from every approaching shadow. But the illusion shattered the next morning when her phone buzzed with a notification from the bank. Her account had received a new transfer, $30,000. Olivia stared in disbelief, checking the number again and again, until she was certain it was neither a scam nor a mistake. The money had come from an anonymous account with no note, no context, no contact information, only $30,000 deposited into an account that had been scraped down to a few spare bills. Her hands shook violently as she locked her phone. She sat at the kitchen table in the dense silence of a room holding its breath. This was a signal, a reminder, a bond. Dominic had not threatened her, had not cornered her, yet he had drawn a line with unmistakable precision. She would not be able to walk away. That money was not a gift. It was a chain made of gold, smooth and invisible, tightening day by day. She knew how the underworld worked. Years of working as a nurse in an emergency room in a poor district had shown her how powerful men built empires by giving first, tightening the reins later. Dominic was doing exactly that. What chilled her more than his access to her bank account was the absolute silence that followed. No demand, no instruction, no contract, only a sum too large for a single mother to ignore, a sum that whispered she had already stepped onto ground from which there was no retreat. Caleb ate breakfast as cheerfully as ever, his lips smeared with peanut butter, his pajamas rumpled, his laughter bright as he chattered about an activity at preschool. Olivia smiled by instinct, though she felt hollow inside. She nodded at each word, but her mind echoed a single sentence. "We are not finished." Now she understood. Dominic did not need to force her. He only needed to plant one thing inside her, fear wrapped in kindness, an unspoken bargain, a silent vow, the beginning of something she could no longer control. The small kitchen was filled with late morning light, as Olivia stood at the sink washing dishes, her mind blank and drifting. She could not remember preparing breakfast or helping Caleb get dressed. Everything felt like a fast-forwarded film while she watched from behind a thick pane of glass. In the living room, Caleb sang a song about a fish and a bus while her aunt folded laundry on the sofa, glancing toward the kitchen as though waiting for an explanation. At last, when Olivia dried her hands and sat at the table, her aunt dropped the towels onto the cushion, crossed her arms, and asked in a sharper tone where the money had come from. Olivia had not intended to tell her, but the weight in her chest made it impossible to keep it hidden. Only part of the truth, she told herself. Just enough to keep her aunt from panicking. She had sent a photo to the wrong person, she said. The man who received it was not ordinary. He believed Caleb was connected to his younger brother. Her aunt leaned back, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Asking then what? Asking who he was. Olivia shook her head and avoided the question. She did not know exactly. His name was Dominic Reyes. At the sound of that name, her aunt's face drained of color. She placed her hand on the table and tapped her finger lightly on the wood as though calculating something grave. "Reyes," she murmured. "Dear God, you have no idea what you have dragged into this house." For the first time, Olivia saw genuine fear in her aunt's expression. Not anger, not scolding, but fear. She asked who Dominic was, and her aunt drew a slow breath, measuring each word. When she was young, she had worked at a laundromat near Eastwood, a place frequented by wealthy people. Once, a woman had been taken away after police discovered 2 bodies in her basement, but the case had vanished shortly after. That woman had been related to Dominic Reyes. No one dared speak his name again. Olivia pressed her hands to her head as her heart pounded wildly. Her aunt shook her head, her voice rough with frustration as she asked if Olivia understood what she had done to keep them safe for the past 10 years. Every rent payment, every school transfer, every job Olivia lost, all of it meant to outrun the past, and now she had brought it crashing back with a single mistaken message. Olivia did not argue. She could not. Each sentence sliced deep. She was only a single mother doing her best to survive. She had never imagined one picture could unleash a black tide like this. As the 2 women sat in heavy silence, Caleb ran out from the bedroom holding a crayon drawing, beaming with pride. He held it up and announced that he had drawn their house, including his mother, his aunt, himself, and the big black car. Olivia and her aunt exchanged a long, wordless stare. Olivia took the picture, her fingers trembling. In the drawing were 3 people, a yellow house, and a black SUV parked directly in front, drawn clearly with bright yellow headlights. Olivia tightened her grip on the paper, trying not to shake. Caleb looked up, asking innocently whose car it was because he had seen it outside the window the night before. Olivia forced a smile that hurt. She told him she did not know, that it was probably just someone lost. The boy nodded, unconcerned, and ran off for his shoes, humming again. Olivia turned toward her aunt, their eyes locking in mutual understanding. No more words were needed. The danger was already at their doorstep, and they had no time left to hesitate. They agreed quickly. Her aunt would slip out the back way to stay with a distant relative in the countryside, ensuring she would not be used as leverage, while Olivia faced the storm alone. That afternoon, when Olivia had barely brought Caleb home from preschool and had not yet slipped his coat off, the phone rang with a jolt that tightened her heart. It was an unknown number. She stared at the screen for several seconds before she dared to slide her finger across and answer. A man's voice came through, not Dominic's, but carrying the same tone that left no room for alternatives. "Apologies, Miss Monroe. The car is on its way to pick you up. The appointment has been arranged. Please be ready in 10 minutes. Before she could react, the line clicked dead. Olivia stood frozen in the narrow hall. Caleb giggled beside her, tugging at her hand, begging her to help remove his knit hat. She knelt, undressed him gently, then hugged him tight as though every moment pressed against him might be the last free breath she would ever have. 10 minutes later, a familiar black SUV idled in front of the gate, silent, almost spectral, as if it had been waiting there for years. A man in a suit stepped out and opened the back door. Olivia walked outside, her hand locked around Caleb's, her gaze flicking toward the neighbors, though no one seemed to notice a thing. When she hesitated at the car, the man inclined his head. "We have been instructed not to force you, but remember, this is for Caleb's safety." Olivia asked nothing. She knew that if Dominic had wanted to take them, he would not bother with politeness. She lifted Caleb into the vehicle, her pulse hammering, while the boy played with a toy, oblivious to the tension that thickened the air. The SUV wound through several streets before turning toward a luxury residential district in the northern part of the city, a place Olivia had never been able to imagine entering. Iron gates opened automatically, cameras rotating with every movement, and uniformed guards stood rigid behind glass. The car stopped in front of a building whose stone facade gleamed under the evening light. The man handed Olivia a keycard, bowed slightly, and walked away without a single word. The apartment was on the 17th floor, opening only to fingerprints and a code. When Olivia stepped inside, she stopped mid-breath. The space was 4 times larger than her old apartment, with walnut floors, an open kitchen lined with modern appliances, a charcoal gray leather sofa, and floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed a city shimmering with gold. A familiar voice rose behind her. Dominic stood beside the dining table, sleeves rolled at his forearms, his white shirt stark against the polished room, his presence nothing like the man who had cornered her in a dark parking lot. He smiled faintly, not cold, yet still capable of sending a tremor through her. "I know you may think this is a form of control," he said, "but it is necessary. I do not want the people who once hunted Matthew to find Caleb before I do." Olivia clutched Caleb tighter, her guarded gaze fixed on him. "You cannot just take me like this." Dominic nodded, calm, as though he had anticipated the response. "I cannot protect you if you stay in that old apartment. You do not understand what Matthew has done, not only to me, but to others who are still hunting for answers. And if Caleb is part of that answer, you have no choice but to let me intervene." Olivia's fist tightened, her jaw hardening, yet instead of protesting, she asked, softly but firmly, "What happens next?" Dominic turned, poured water into 2 crystal glasses, his voice steady. "You will live here, at least until I am certain Caleb is safe. There will be childcare if needed, a private doctor, anything required. You can still work. Everything has been arranged." Olivia looked around the apartment as though staring into a gilded cage. Dominic set the glass on the counter, his tone softening. "I do not want to control you, but I must be sure that if Matthew is alive, he will not use Caleb as a bargaining piece. And if he is dead, then I must know why." Olivia did not respond. She looked down at her son, now sitting cross-legged on the soft rug, drawing scribbles across its expensive fibers, blissfully unaware of the darkness tightening around them. She knew she had no retreat, and Dominic, in his own way, had offered something she could not refuse. The first days in the new apartment drifted by like a surreal dream. Olivia woke on a bed 3 times larger than her old one, wrapped in crisp white sheets, morning light pouring through glass that stretched from floor to ceiling, birdsong drifting strangely through the city air. Every corner felt curated for a magazine spread, from the marble bathroom to the immaculate kitchen. Caleb adored his new room filled with untouched toys, rows of bright storybooks, and a fabric tent shaped like a castle in the living room. He laughed more, ate better, slept deeply. But Olivia did not. She had not slept a full night since arriving. The sense of being watched never faded. Each time she walked down the hall, a guard would nod politely, his uniform perfectly pressed, his eyes tracking every movement of her and her son. Cameras were positioned discreetly, not invasive but unmistakably present, enough to remind her that no moment in this place belonged fully to her. Dominic appeared more frequently, at first a few times a week, then nearly every day. He arrived with a calm presence, sometimes crouching on the floor to talk with Caleb, sometimes reviewing documents at the dining table while Olivia prepared dinner. He never touched her, never demanded anything, yet his presence filled the apartment until it felt smaller around her. Each knock on the door made her breath catch, wondering what he wanted that day. Dominic behaved with perfect politeness, but it was that very perfection that chilled her. He knew Caleb's mealtimes, knew she preferred black tea to coffee, knew she had a mild pollen allergy. Once, when Caleb had a small fever, the private doctor arrived within 10 minutes. Olivia had not called anyone. She began testing small things, changing her work schedule, stepping into the hallway at odd hours, leaving the kitchen light off though she always turned it on at dusk, and each time something or someone responded. Once she stepped onto the balcony near midnight just to breathe, and minutes later her phone rang. Dominic's voice was low but firm. "You should come inside. The air is not good tonight." Olivia said nothing. She pulled the curtains closed and sat on the edge of her bed, with her heart pounding as though someone stood just behind her shoulder. The apartment was beautiful in a way that felt unreal, yet to her it had become a golden cage without bars, without locks, but with no path out. She was allowed to work, a car waiting every day at the hospital entrance, But if she lingered too long in the cafeteria or took a different route home, a message would arrive instantly. Everything was monitored, though no one ever acknowledged it. Olivia understood with devastating clarity that her freedom was no longer her own. She had thought Dominic a violent kind of danger, loud and forceful, but she now realized he operated on a different level. He did not need to shout. He only needed to control every variable, and he was doing it flawlessly. Caleb remained joyful, seeing nothing but toys, good food, and a Mr. Dominic who always arrived with coloring books or cookies. Olivia watched her son's bright laughter and felt a tightness rise in her throat. She knew this could not last. Yet she had no idea how to break free without putting Caleb in greater danger. Dominic was enclosing them in a tightening circle, and the most terrifying part was that he did so with a gentleness that almost felt like kindness. Olivia was sitting at the dining table, trying to focus on reviewing her provisional payroll from the hospital when Dominic appeared, as if he always knew the precise moment when her strength to resist slipped. He entered without a sound and set a thin stack of documents on the table, his voice low, and even as he said he had a proposal. Olivia did not answer, only glanced at the papers in front of her. He continued, taking the seat across from her, the distance between them calculated with unsettling precision, not close enough to feel threatening, yet close enough that she could not pretend he was not there. There was a legal branch within his system, he explained, an investment arm that funded private hospitals, rehabilitation centers, and training programs for medical personnel. He needed someone on the inside, someone with no criminal record, someone who was not under surveillance, someone who could move naturally in a public healthcare environment. He paused, his eyes never leaving her face. He had chosen her. Olivia leaned back slightly, gripping her glass as if searching for something steady to hold. This was not an invitation. It was a command wrapped in civility. She drew a slow breath and asked why it had to be her. Dominic did not grow impatient, because she was intelligent, cautious, not greedy, and he trusted her more than anyone in his current network. She would have a salary, a contract, everything perfectly clear on paper. But she would also see things no one outside the system was meant to see. Olivia pressed her lips together, thinking with the careful rhythm of someone counting each heartbeat. And if she refused, Dominic tilted his head without smiling and without raising his voice. He would be disappointed, he said, and would have to find another way to keep Caleb safe. Olivia felt her heart constrict painfully. He did not need to shout. One quiet sentence was enough to make her understand. If she stayed by his side, no one would dare touch Caleb. He repeated the words slowly, looking directly into her eyes as though engraving each syllable in her mind. Olivia stared down at the table. She did not trust Dominic, but she trusted the nature of men who hunted, threatened, and destroyed others over unfinished history, and she knew such men would not hesitate to reach for a child. And if Dominic wanted to, he could make Caleb disappear without leaving a trace. He never had to be the one to act directly. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, letting her fingers brush the edge of the documents. She would read them, she said. Dominic nodded, as if everything had already fallen neatly into place. There was time, he told her, though not much. He stood and walked toward the window, the evening light catching the sharp bridge of his nose and the unyielding focus in his eyes. He asked if she thought he wanted this life, confessing that he had not chosen it, but once one stepped inside, there was no turning back. Olivia did not ask anything more. She sat silently, feeling every cell in her body tightening around her. Dominic turned back, his voice lower, almost like a final warning. There were people searching for Caleb, he said. Not just him, and if they reached her first, none of the choices she held now would matter. Olivia carried the stack of papers into the bedroom and closed the door behind her as though that could keep the truth outside. Caleb lay on the rug assembling a wooden train, his smile bright and oblivious. She sat beside him and asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts, whether he wanted her to take a new job. He nodded enthusiastically, not caring what she meant. Olivia pulled him into her arms, pressing her cheek to his hair, still scented faintly of children's shampoo, and knew she had stepped one more pace into a world with no return. Not because she wanted to, but because protecting Caleb was the only choice she could not refuse. Rain fell that night, streaking down the windows like blurred scratches across memory. Dominic arrived later than usual, his white shirt damp at the shoulders, a warm meal tucked beneath his arm. He set the container on the counter, glanced around when he did not see Caleb, and asked quietly where the boy was. Olivia was pouring tea, her eyes fixed on the boiling water. He was asleep, she said, exhausted from playing all day at the center. Dominic nodded, poured 2 cups of tea, one for her and one for himself, and settled onto the sofa, his gaze no longer carrying its usual cold edge. After a long silence, with the apartment wrapped in stillness, he spoke abruptly. She had once asked why he was so certain Caleb was connected to Matthew. Olivia rested her arm along the back of the chair, not answering, but her eyes told him she was listening. Dominic looked ahead, as though replaying something far away. He and Matthew did not share a mother, but they had grown up together because their father had been the one to keep both boys in the same home. Matthew had been different from him. Gentle, kind, naturally trusted by others, while Dominic had been trained to build, to control, to keep everything contained within his grasp, and Matthew had chosen instead to understand people in order to influence them. Olivia tilted her head slightly. What had happened? Dominic let out a dry, humorless sound that resembled a laugh. Matthew had betrayed him. Not only him, but an entire system. He had taken data, gained access to key partners, then vanished. Dominic had not killed him, he said. He had not even had the chance. One day, Matthew had simply disappeared as though he had never existed. No trace, no camera capturing a final moment. Only a scribbled note left in the notebook Dominic used every day. I do not belong here. Olivia swallowed hard, unsure what to say. Dominic's gaze shifted toward the hallway leading to Caleb's room. The first time he had seen Caleb's photo, he had thought he was looking at an old picture. That face, those eyes, so eerily like Matthew's, not just a resemblance but a kind of blood-deep echo. Olivia felt her lungs tighten. She had once believed the likeness was only Dominic's excuse to pull her into his orbit, but hearing him now, she could feel he genuinely believed it. Matthew was the only person Dominic had ever tried to protect from the system, the only one he had given a chance at another life. But Matthew had turned away. Dominic rose and walked slowly toward the window, his shadow stretching long across the floor in the dim light. And now he did not know whether Matthew was dead or alive. But if Caleb truly was his son, then the boy was the last remaining link. Those Matthew had betrayed would not stay quiet if they learned of the boy's existence. A chill ran down Olivia's spine. Dominic turned back, his eyes meeting hers with no threat, only a truth laid bare. He did not care who Caleb's father was. He cared only that the child carried the face of a man whose name had once driven Dominic's enemies into a frenzy, and he could not allow that to happen again. Olivia nodded faintly, her voice locked in her throat. She understood now that Dominic was no longer acting out of personal resentment. He was acting out of fear of a past not yet buried. And Caleb, without meaning to, had become the key that could reopen that door to darkness once more. Olivia sat in the dimness of the living room, the only light a soft amber glow melting through the doorway from the kitchen behind her. She could not remember when she had turned off the television. Everything in the apartment had fallen into such perfect stillness that she could hear the low hum of the air conditioner, the distant whisper of traffic below, and even the quiet rhythm of her own breath. Dominic had left not 10 minutes earlier, carrying the unfinished cup of tea with him, and leaving behind the faint trace of his cologne lingering like an afterthought in the air. Olivia pressed her palm against her chest, feeling as though her heartbeat had not yet returned to its natural pace. She could not name the storm building inside her. It was not fear, at least not the kind she had once felt toward violent men. Dominic never yelled, never cursed, never issued a clear threat. He cared for Caleb with an attentiveness that bordered on unsettling, buying exactly the brand of milk the child liked, replacing every bath product in the apartment because he knew Olivia was allergic to mint. But it was precisely that meticulousness that sent a chill through her. There had never been physical contact between them beyond the most basic boundaries of politeness. Dominic had never touched her, never crossed a line, and yet he lived in her mind, threading through each choice, each hesitation, each moment when she almost spoke or acted differently. His control required no violence. It manifested through presence, through the way she could no longer clearly distinguish her own decisions from the ones he had quietly arranged in advance. One day, she feared, she would forget the taste of freedom altogether. She rose slowly and stepped into Caleb's room. He slept deeply, his face relaxed, his mouth slightly open, his stuffed pillow slipping off to one side. Looking at him, Olivia felt her chest tighten beneath an invisible weight. Everything she endured was for him. She told herself that every day. Yet lately, another voice had begun whispering inside her, the instinctive voice of a woman who had once been betrayed, who had survived falls she never saw coming. Dominic said he was protecting them, but the way he looked at her, the way he tracked every hour of her day, the way he knew when she was angry, when she could not sleep, when she spent too long standing still in the bathroom, All of it had drifted far from concern. It felt like possession, as though she were a piece he needed to keep intact, not out of humanity but because she was tied to some larger plan. Dominic had never said he loved her. He had never looked at her with desire like the men she had known in the past. Yet there was something in his gaze far more frightening than longing. It was the gaze of a man who refused to fail, even when the thing he tried to control was a living person with a heart and fear of her own. Olivia knew she had to find a way out of this spiral, but the more she pulled back, the deeper she sank. Even simple errands had been replaced by delivery services. Her commute to work was escorted. When she once asked the driver to stop by a bookstore, he smiled gently and offered a reminder rather than a refusal. Dominic preferred schedules optimized. She needed no further explanation. He was tightening his grip with a power that made no noise. In the rare minutes she was alone, Olivia began recording every recent event in a notebook hidden beneath the refrigerator. She wrote everything: who came, who called, what Caleb said, what Dominic asked, the precise dates and times. She did not know if it would ever matter, but at least it allowed her to hold on to a fragment of herself, a small record proving she had once been clear-minded. And when Dominic later asked whether she trusted him, she only smiled, nodded, and turned away before he could see the confusion in her eyes expanding like darkness seeping through the cracks of her life. All day she felt a vague unease with no clear cause. A message from Dominic arrived at noon, brief and simple as always. Tonight, 7 o'clock, penthouse. No explanation, no hint of purpose. She had grown used to the way he issued instructions, but something about this one felt different. She asked the nanny to arrive early, prepared Caleb's dinner, then stood before the mirror for a long moment. The simple black dress she had chosen, worn for the first time in years, no longer felt like hers, as though she were stepping into a role she did not recognize. The familiar SUV drove her to a high-rise in the southern part of the city. Dominic's penthouse occupied the top floor, its private elevator opening into a vast room surrounded entirely by glass. The city glittered below, brilliant and distant like a world she no longer belonged to. Dominic stood at the small bar, sleeves rolled, pouring wine into 2 crystal glasses. When he saw her, he said nothing. He simply looked. The silence stretched until Olivia had to avert her gaze, yet that very look made her skin warm, as though the entire room had narrowed itself around her. They ate dinner at a long table arranged like a 5-star restaurant. The dishes were prepared by a private chef, though Dominic allowed no one else to linger. After the main course, only the 2 of them remained. Red wine shimmered in their glasses. Candlelight painted softened shadows across his face, making him appear almost gentle. He asked small questions, listened as she spoke about Caleb, about the struggles of single motherhood, about her old dream of becoming a head nurse before money forced her to stop. For every word she offered, Dominic watched her as if she were a piece of music he had listened to 1,000 times and still wished to hear again. He offered no sweet phrases, no flirtation, but it was the silence that disarmed her most. For the first time, she forgot the notebook, the cameras, the lines she was supposed to maintain. Dominic poured more wine, the scent of fermented grapes softening the air. She drank only a few sips, but her thoughts drifted lightly, not from alcohol but from the way he looked at her, not as a pawn to be protected, not as the mother of a child who might be the key to some buried conflict, but as a woman of her own, singular. Olivia leaned back, her chest tightening with an unfamiliar feeling. She had once been admired, once been loved, once walked hand in hand with someone through crowded streets, but it had been so long since anyone had looked at her as though she were the center of an entire world. And now, the man who made her feel that way was Dominic Reyes, the most dangerous man she had ever known. He did not need to touch her, did not need to speak soft words. He simply sat there, his eyes dark as a moonless night, sharp as a blade, yet softening every time she bit her lip or lowered her gaze. Dinner ended around 8:30. Dominic led her to the balcony, where a cool wind swept away the scents of their meal. He said nothing at first, standing beside her with their shoulders nearly brushing. Then, in a voice so quiet she had to lean closer to hear, he murmured that sometimes he forgot the original reason he had kept her near. Olivia turned and found him looking directly at her, no longer guarded, no longer calculating. Only truth, naked and deep. In that moment she knew that if he took one step closer, if he lifted a hand to her cheek, she would not have the strength to resist. But Dominic did nothing. He only gave a faint, unreadable smile, then walked away to call the elevator. When the doors opened, he held them for her, and the last look he gave her was the one that kept her awake the entire night. Not because of the wine, but because she had begun to forget what was real and what was illusion in the dangerous bond forming between them. Near midnight, Olivia jolted awake to the insistent vibration of the phone on her bedside table. In the dark, the screen flared like a cold slash across the fragile quiet. The message came from an unfamiliar number. No name, no context. She rubbed her eyes, opened it, and her heart tightened instantly inside her chest. The words appeared stark and deliberate, each syllable like a trap laid long before she ever stepped into it. He cannot protect you forever. Olivia sat up straight, a chill rippling down her spine. She scanned the dark room. Everything remained still. Caleb was sleeping in the next room, and nothing appeared out of place. Yet in her mind, terrible possibilities had already begun to unfurl. She locked the phone, ready to delete the message, then paused. Instinct urged her to keep it. Only 5 words, without a name or trace, yet enough to shatter every scrap of certainty she had tried to hold on to. Dominic had promised to protect them, but who could say he was not the very reason danger kept finding its way to her door? She pulled on a coat, hurried into the living room, retrieved a spare phone hidden in a drawer, snapped a picture of the message, and sent it to Dominic with a single word: explain. Barely 2 minutes later, the phone rang. Dominic did not wait for her to speak. His voice was metal cold as he ordered her to open the door. Olivia unlocked the apartment less than 5 minutes later. Dominic stepped inside without his usual entourage, his suit jacket half-buttoned, his tie slightly askew, his eyes burning with a sharp, restless fire. He seized the phone from her hand, glanced at the message for only a heartbeat, then turned away and called someone. His voice was low and clipped, issuing terse commands in a language Olivia did not recognize, but the fury behind each word was unmistakable. When the call ended in less than half a minute, he tossed the phone onto the table and faced her. Did anyone else know she was here? Olivia shook her head, forcing her voice steady. No one. She had not gone outside, had not spoken to anyone except her aunt and Melanie, and neither knew this address. Dominic fell silent, his eyes darkening like a storm gathering. He stepped closer, so close Olivia braced for shouting, for accusations. Instead, he looked into her eyes and said in a deep, guttural murmur that this should not have happened. Then he called someone named Javier. Olivia could not understand the full conversation, only that Dominic demanded the situation be erased before morning and all loose ends removed without a trace. Afterward, he sank onto the sofa, rubbing his temple as if holding back a tidal wave of rage. Olivia sat opposite him, her heartbeat stumbling. He did not look at her as he said quietly that there were men still alive after Matthew vanished. Men who did not forgive, men who did not forget, and if Caleb truly carried Matthew's blood, they would do anything necessary to wipe out the last thread. Olivia whispered, "If I had never sent that picture, would this still have happened?" Dominic met her gaze, and for the first time she saw not anger but something close to obsession. Did she really believe he would not have found Caleb anyway? Olivia froze. Dominic walked to the window, city lights reflecting across the tension in his face. When he turned back, he no longer looked like the Dominic she had grown accustomed to. He cracked his knuckles once, his voice blunt. She did not need to know who sent the message. He would not be sending another. Olivia wanted to ask what Dominic had done, wanted to demand answers, but the private elevator chimed at that exact moment. Dominic signaled for her to stay where she was. He stepped into the hall, the door closing behind him. Minutes later he returned, a faint smear of blood on his shirt cuff. Not much, but enough for Olivia to see it clearly. Dominic looked at her without excuses, without lies, speaking in a low, rasped voice. "I told you, no one touches you." And for the first time since she had met him, Olivia felt fear in its truest, deepest form. Not fear of him hurting her, but fear of the part of herself that was beginning to accept his violence as a necessary cost of survival. Olivia curled into the corner of the sofa, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She watched Dominic stand there, the blood already wiped away, yet the image etched in her mind like permanent ink. His eyes no longer burned with anger, but neither did they hold the softness she had begun to see. They had settled into something still, fathomless, and in that stillness Olivia felt herself drifting without anything solid to hold on to. Her chest tightened, her breath shortened, her throat closed. Panic crashed through her with no warning, a cold wave swallowing every fragile defense she had left. Dominic sensed it immediately. He said nothing at first, only approached slowly and sat across from her. When her breath hitched, her eyes darting wildly around the room in search of escape, he held out a hand but did not touch her. Olivia stared at that hand, frozen. Dominic did not push. He waited. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he told her she was having a panic attack and needed to breathe more slowly. He guided her through each inhale and exhale as though coaxing her back from the edge of a cliff. When her body remained taut with fear, Dominic slid his arm gently behind her neck and drew her toward him. Olivia did not resist. She collapsed against him with the instinctive desperation of someone reaching for air after sinking too long underwater. He did not hold her tightly, only firmly enough to keep her anchored. His breath was steady, his chest a solid, immovable shield. Olivia pressed her cheek to his shirt and felt the strong, measured rhythm of his heart beneath the fabric, a heartbeat that never rushed, never wavered, and that steady beat pulled her back into herself. When her breathing steadied and she became aware again that she was still in his arms, she edged away slightly. Dominic loosened his hold but did not retreat. He remained beside her, watching her with a gaze that no longer carried command or calculation. It was warm, gentle, almost like the glow of a dim lamp in a half-remembered dream. Olivia asked what he had done to the man who sent the message. Dominic met her eyes without hesitation. There was no pride in his expression, no cold facade, just the simple truth of what he was. He told her he protected her, at any cost. The words sent a shiver through her, not from terror, but from the unsettling realization that she believed him. A part of her, buried deep, had stopped doubting, not because of logic, but because of the way he had held her, not urgent, not possessive, only steadying her when she was unraveling. Olivia lifted her gaze and met his eyes again. For the first time, she felt herself seen not as someone to be studied or controlled, but as someone singular. Dominic brushed his fingers lightly along her cheek, the warmth of his touch slow and searching as if moving through darkness. Olivia leaned toward him, their breaths mingling, neither speaking. Only a long moment stretched between them, a moment where two opposing worlds met without excuse or explanation. She did not know how long they stayed like that. She knew only that when Dominic whispered her name, his voice low and rough like aged wine, she could not turn away. And when he leaned in, not claiming her but reaching for something even he could not name, Olivia closed her eyes and let every boundary fall. It was not weakness. It was the first time in years she felt touched as a human being, without armor, without pretenses, simply Olivia and Dominic. In a brief suspended moment where the world outside ceased to exist, Olivia sat motionless by the window, the pale morning light slipping through the thin curtains like quiet strands of gold. Dominic had left early, after a night she could not yet name, could not fully understand. What remained was not emptiness. It was weight. It was real. She knew the moment had come to speak the truth, not for Dominic alone, but for herself, for Caleb, for the wound that had never healed. That evening, Olivia walked into Dominic's office without knocking. He was reading a document, his attention steady, as if he had expected her to come but did not need to look up until she stood directly before him. Her eyes no longer filled with fear. Dominic lifted his gaze and watched her in silence. Olivia drew a long breath and began, her voice rough but steady. Caleb was not Matthew's child. Dominic showed no reaction, no raised brow, no shift in expression, only silence, deepening his stare, as though he were falling into the very center of her words. She continued, each syllable scraping her throat. 6 years earlier, she had taken a night job in a bar. There had been a regular customer, charming at first, courteous enough that she paid him little mind. Until one night, Olivia clasped her hands tightly in front of her stomach. He drugged her. She remembered nothing, only waking with bruises and a stain on her skin that no amount of scrubbing could erase. She had not gone to the police. No one would believe a poor woman working night shifts without witnesses or proof. A month later she learned she was pregnant. Dominic remained silent, but Olivia felt the air around them shift, no longer still but strained with something barely contained. She had considered ending the pregnancy, had even scheduled the appointment, but could not go through with it. Caleb was the only beautiful thing born out of all that ruin, and she had never once regretted him. Olivia lifted her chin, her eyes fierce now, stripped of shame. He needed to know. She did not want him believing she had hidden anything of ulterior design. She had stayed silent out of humiliation, out of disgust for what had been done to her. Dominic rose, each movement slow and controlled. He stepped toward her and stopped a short distance away. He looked at her for a long time. Then he spoke in a low, decisive voice. Good. Olivia blinked, unable to believe what she had heard. Dominic's eyes held no anger, no disappointment. I could have done a DNA test in secret from the very first day. Olivia, he said, his voice dropping to a murmur, I have the means. But I didn't. I wanted you to tell me yourself, because I need the truth from you, not from a piece of paper. Then it is entirely yours, he said. It belongs to you alone. It belongs to neither him nor any fragment of the past. It is your blood, not anyone else's. He stepped closer, reached out, and touched her cheek lightly. And if you want, from now on, he is mine as well. Olivia stood still, her eyes filling not from pity but from a tenderness she had never expected from a man she once believed had no heart. Dominic did not pull her into an embrace. He simply stood close enough for her to feel the warmth of his breath, far enough that she could choose for herself, and when she leaned her forehead against his chest, Dominic closed his eyes as though releasing a weight no one had ever seen him carry. The room fell silent, but it was the silence of trust, of acceptance, of beginning anew. No more Matthew, no more assumptions, no more shadows. Only Olivia, with a scar that had not yet healed, and Dominic, with hands that had finally learned not only how to hold, but how to keep safe. Caleb was no longer the key to any secret. He was a life, belonging to Olivia, and now, if she allowed, belonging to Dominic as well. That morning, the apartment rested under an unfamiliar quiet. There was no soft music drifting from the concealed speakers, no guards pacing the hallway, and no Dominic appearing with his penetrating gaze ready to read the corners of her mind. Instead, a white envelope sat neatly beside a still warm cup of coffee on the kitchen counter. Olivia stared at it as if it were something foreign. In a home where Dominic controlled every detail, this sudden silence felt strange, as though she had awakened inside a parallel world. She opened the envelope. Inside were 2 items, a short handwritten letter and a key. Dominic's handwriting was bold and steady, like the man himself. Olivia, there are no guards today, no cameras, and no Dominic. This choice is yours. The key belongs to another apartment. The address is written on the back. Freedom, if you want it. If you return tonight, I will be here. This door will always be open, but I will not lock you in a cage. Olivia clutched the letter, her eyes fixed on the key resting in her palm. It glimmered faintly in the morning light, small and ordinary, yet it weighed on her chest like a stone. She sat for nearly an hour, watching Caleb play on the floor, his toys scattered like the pieces of a life she had never dared to hope for. Dominic had given her an exit. No pressure, no trap, no threat, just a choice. And that frightened her more than any psychological tightening he had ever imposed. She had grown accustomed to being controlled, accustomed to choosing survival, accustomed to staying in a place because danger lurked outside. But now, for the first time in years, Olivia stood at a true crossroads. One path was Dominic, with all his power, his shadows, and the quiet warmth of his arms that had become the place she sought whenever her world collapsed. The other path was freedom, something she once believed she wanted above all else. But now it appeared uncertain, lacking the depth of the gaze that had once calmed her storms. She remembered the night Dominic held her through her panic, the first time he had touched her not to control but to steady. She remembered his expression when she confessed her past, the way he nodded without judgment or pity, and she remembered his words, "Then he is entirely yours." Caleb belonged to her. But Olivia also understood something else now. Dominic had stepped back, he had opened his heart, not the apartment door, and the price of leaving would be walking away from a man who had once ruled empires and now held on to one thing only, the promise not to keep her if she did not want to stay. Olivia rose, walked into the bedroom, and watched Caleb coloring a red dragon with total concentration. She sat beside him and wrapped her arms around him tightly. Freedom was not the absence of fear. It was choosing the thing that frightened her, and still moving toward it. When night fell, Olivia put on a light coat and slipped the envelope into her pocket. She did not look into the mirror, did not leave a note. She simply took Caleb by the hand and stepped outside as if beginning an ordinary day. No car waited for them, no guard followed, only a wide city and 2 figures walking beneath the dim wash of streetlights. The key in her pocket weighed heavily, but her heart felt lighter. And when she turned once more toward the apartment where Dominic had stood, had waited, had held her as if afraid to breathe too deeply, she whispered into the night, too softly for anyone to hear, "Let me decide for myself which is freedom, and which is the cage I choose to remain in." The glass tower that housed Dominic's headquarters rose like a cold block of steel in the heart of the city, imposing and impenetrable. Olivia stood before the reception desk on the 32nd floor, dressed in a tailored business dress she never imagined she would wear. No more hospital scrubs, no more antiseptic scent, no more weary footsteps echoing under fluorescent lights. Instead, there was the hum of printers, the rhythmic tapping of keyboards, and the soft drift of dark roasted coffee through a polished open space. Dominic's personal secretary, a woman in her early 40s with her hair neatly tied back and a voice as crisp as winter wind, guided her through each office, introducing every person and department. Yet Olivia felt the restrained, fleeting looks brushing over her with a polite distance. They knew who she was, or rather, they knew to whom she belonged. No whispers, but no warmth either. She did not blame them. She understood she was an unknown variable in a world that functioned like a machine greased by money, influence, and silence. The first week passed in a blur. Dominic had arranged for her to work within the Internal Human Resources Division, a place far from legal or financial dealings, yet close enough for her to observe the structure of his empire and how it breathed. Meetings, contracts, encrypted calls. Olivia noted everything, missing nothing. She watched quietly, spoke little, never using Dominic's name like a badge of privilege. He never appeared in the office while she worked, never sent messages, never intervened. Yet each afternoon, a car still brought her and Caleb back to the old apartment, always immaculate, always stocked, always secure. Dominic kept his word. He let her step into his world, but never forced her deeper into it, and that freedom made her want to understand even more. On nights when Caleb slept, she reviewed documents, read books on human resources, labor law, and organizational psychology, subjects she never imagined would become part of her daily rhythm when she was still mopping floors. Dominic did not compliment her, nor did he ask about her progress. But one morning when she left a stack of paperwork on the kitchen counter, she found a handwritten note. "The final analysis is sharp, better than my 2 senior assistants." No signature, but she knew the handwriting. It was not a romantic praise, yet something in her chest warmed in a quiet, unexpected way. She was becoming part of this world, not because Dominic had pulled her in, but because she had walked forward on her own feet. Still, she maintained boundaries. She did not join meetings with sensitive undertones. She did not ask about the lower floors she had never been allowed to enter, and each time Dominic invited her to dinner, she kept a respectful distance, not out of rejection, but to ensure that her heart did not confuse power or debt with affection. Once, in the elevator, she unexpectedly crossed paths with Dominic after nearly a week of communicating only through documents. He stood immaculate in a black suit, his gaze as penetrating and unreadable as always. Olivia offered a small nod. Dominic tilted his head and asked quietly if she was doing well. She replied simply that she was learning. And he smiled. Not a dangerous smile, nor a seductive one, but a rare smile of recognition. In that moment, Olivia understood she was no longer a woman forced to live under his protection. She was choosing to stay, not as a caged bird, but as someone learning to survive among wolves while keeping her own heart intact. That night, rain tapped lightly against the apartment windows, a steady rhythm echoing through Olivia's tired mind. She had just finished the quarterly personnel report, her eyes still burning from the sleepless night. Her nerves still unsettled after a brief conversation with Dominic that morning. He had said little, only asked her to come to the penthouse that evening because not everything can be handled on paper. The invitation sounded casual, yet Olivia knew Dominic never chose words carelessly. When she stepped into the stone-toned penthouse, every sense awakened at once. There was no conference table, no documents, only a dining table set for 2, candles flickering gently, and wine glasses catching soft light. Dominic stood near the window, his back to her, hands in his pockets, his black suit blending with the night beyond the glass. When he turned, his gaze was no longer that of a company head, a guardian, or a man holding immense power. It was the gaze of someone standing at the edge of something he could no longer disguise. He pulled out her chair, a simple gesture heavy with unspoken meaning, and Olivia felt a faint tremor run through her. They ate without speaking of work or Caleb, without any of the walls that usually stood between them. She laughed at his story of being bitten by a stray cat in a scrapyard at 13, and he listened quietly as she spoke of the cornbread her mother once baked before disappearing from her life. No one drew boundaries, yet the boundaries blurred on their own, softened by each glance, each silence, each shared breath. When Dominic rose and moved toward the window before turning back to face her, Olivia felt the air change. He said nothing, simply looked at her. That look was no longer an order, no longer a demand. It was an invitation without words, something deep and far more dangerous than intimidation. He wanted to step further, not through control, not through ownership, but through permission. Olivia stood, each step weighted not by fear of him, but by fear of herself, fear that her scars had taught her to recoil from gentleness, fear that she might forget how to distinguish warmth from danger. Dominic approached, stopping close enough for her to feel the gravity of him. He did not touch her. His voice was low, barely a breath trailing across her spine. You do not have to choose tonight, or any night. But I will not hide this. I want you. Not because of Caleb, not because of obligation, but because of you. She lifted her eyes, meeting his gaze, feeling a sudden misstep of her heartbeat. In his expression she saw not only desire but hesitation, the quiet fear of rejection, something she never thought a man like him could hold. For the first time in many years, she did not feel like a woman hiding inside a shell of survival. She felt seen, truly seen, and that frightened her more than any darkness. Olivia did not answer. She stepped back, not to flee but to breathe, to hold together the part of her trembling with panic and the part of her trembling with longing. She whispered that she needed time. Dominic nodded, offering no questions, no pressure. He simply opened the door and let her walk out once more by her own choice. And as the door closed behind her, Olivia realized that this was not a retreat. It was the first step in a journey she knew she could no longer turn away from. On that morning, Olivia sat on the long bench beside the window of the Human Resources office, her hands wrapped around a cup of cold coffee as she stared down at the rush of traffic below, without truly seeing anything. Her mind frayed after too many sleepless nights, not because of nightmares, but because she had never been this tangled inside. Dominic had not texted, had not appeared, had not sent a car, and though she still went to work, still completed every task, still cared for Caleb as she always had, every beat inside her felt slightly misaligned, like a piece of music slipping at its most crucial moment. She thought about his eyes that evening, the way he stood without touching her though he easily could have, the way he let her walk out and did not pull her back. And she realized it was not distance but respect, and that was precisely what made the feeling growing in her chest impossible to extinguish. It was not love, at least not yet, but something deeper and far harder to name, a kind of trust. Dominic was dangerous, and she knew this better than anyone, knew he had made traitors disappear without a trace, knew he commanded an entire network with a handful of quiet calls, yet whenever he was near her he kept a careful distance, always asked with his eyes before reaching out, always left her room to refuse. And as someone whose choices had been stolen from her more than once, Olivia understood the weight of such small mercies. That afternoon, when she stepped out of the elevator on the top floor, she found Dominic at his desk, the pale gold of late sunlight spilling across the glass wall behind him, making him look less like a man in power, and more like someone carrying the world while waiting for a knock on the door. She did not knock. She entered, and he looked up without surprise, as if he had always known she would return. She stopped less than a yard from his desk, her heart pounding like a drum, and without knowing why the words came out at all, she said the one thing she knew she had to say or she would never be able to move forward. I do not love you, Dominic. He did not move, did not flinch, simply watched her as though he was listening not to her words but to her breath. But I trust you, she said, and that frightens me even more. Silence fell between them, thick as velvet. Dominic rose and came closer, and Olivia did not step back. There was something in his eyes, usually cold as tempered steel, that looked almost like pain. You owe me nothing, Olivia, he said quietly. You do not have to trust me. I do not need you to. She shook her head gently. No, but I do. And I do not know if that makes me stronger or weaker, only that I have not given that to anyone in many years. Dominic closed his eyes for a moment as if bracing against the force of his own emotions, then opened them again, his voice low, almost a whisper. If you give me that, I will not break it. Not with action, not with words, not with silence. She looked at him for a long time, then nodded, not as acceptance of a romance nor a declaration of love, but as an agreement between two people who had been broken and were learning together that they might still deserve something more. 3 months later, spring arrived late in the city where Olivia had once stepped out of the shadows, and a soft breeze drifted through the penthouse windows onto the small lavender pots Caleb had planted himself. The open kitchen smelled of banana bread, and the bright laughter of a child echoed through the wide rooms, erasing whatever remnants of coldness once lived there. Olivia stood at the sink drying the last dish, watching Caleb build a tower with Dominic's security guard, a man who had once terrified her with his icy stare but now sat patiently fitting colored blocks beside a 5-year-old boy. Dominic walked in with rolled sleeves and a freshly made cup of coffee, his gaze lingering on Olivia longer than necessary, as though simply seeing her in this quiet moment was enough to make a man who had lived in darkness believe there was something left worth living for. Are you all right? he asked, his voice softer than the breeze itself. She set the dish down and nodded. Not because everything was perfect or because the scars on her heart had vanished, but because she was finally choosing to stay somewhere, not out of fear or dependence, but because she wanted to. Dominic placed the cup on the counter and stepped closer, his eyes serious but no longer fierce, his voice steady and weighted with an emotion she never imagined she would hear from him. "Now you are mine," he said, "but only because you choose to be." It was not a victory claimed, nor a possessive declaration, but an affirmation, a trust returned. Olivia laid her hand over his chest, feeling the steady beat beneath his shirt, and knew there was a rhythm there slowly aligning with her own. Caleb ran over, wrapped himself around her legs, then reached up for Dominic, who lifted him effortlessly as though he had always done so. No one spoke of old debts, of threats, of the enemies buried in the past. Even Olivia's aunt had been brought back from the countryside, settled safely in a quiet apartment nearby, visiting every Sunday to fill the room with familiar laughter. All understood that this peace had not arrived by chance. It was earned through choice, through bravery, through the willingness to believe in something fragile after a lifetime of fractures. Perhaps life did not belong to the strongest, but to those who, even after breaking, stood up again, dared to love, dared to trust once more. And that, Olivia realized, was what she carried forward. Not wealth, not power, but the feeling of living honestly, watching her son grow in safety, and holding the hand of a man who was not perfect but who cherished the most delicate thing she had to offer, a heart once shattered. Thank you for staying until the final moments of this story, for listening to each emotional turn and every quiet revelation. If something in this journey touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, like, and share so you will not miss the deeply moving stories we bring each day. And you, what do you think of Olivia, of Dominic, of the choice they made? Have you ever stood at a crossroads between freedom and trust? We would love to read your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. Tell us what this story reminded you of in your own life. Until the next video, may your days be filled with health, joy, and peace. Goodbye, and see you again soon.